Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar hosted by EGIS and the Nuclear Industry Association on Built to Deliver, How Collaboration and Replication Accelerate Nuclear Programs. Very glad to be joined by a great panel today. First, let me thank EGIS for helping pull this together and for hosting us and for very kindly inviting me to chair this webinar. We're really talking about the most important subject in the nuclear industry today, which is how in this period of accelerating delivery do we get the best results in cost and schedule, practical project delivery for the programs we're trying to execute for the country that's trusting us to deliver. That is the main challenge. There's a lot of support out there for nuclear as technology. The technology itself is unsurpassed in the potential it has for the country. The question now focuses in how do we deliver these things to time, to budget? What are the lessons we've learned from our experience so far, and how are we intending to bring that forward in the projects which are underway? And how, especially in these very complex projects, can we get teams working together, cooperating effectively, minimizing some of these interface risks, getting the benefits of replication, all of that stuff. So we'll cover that today. The four speakers will each give a bit of introduction, their key thoughts, some of the big topics in their area. I'll ask some questions, but I want all of you to be thinking of some good questions as well, because we'll have a little time for audience Q&A at the end. You'll see that Q&A function just at the top there. Please put your questions in there. If you put them in chat, I can't guarantee that I'll see them, so you might just have a nice chat with each other, but you might not get your questions asked. So use that Q&A function. The good folks at Microsoft have put it in there for a good reason. I should have introduced myself for those who don't know. I'm Lincoln Hill, the Director of Policy and External Affairs for the Nuclear Industry Association. If you don't know what all that means in shorthand, I guess I'm the chief lobbyist / chief salesman for nuclear power in general in this country. But the four panelists I have for you today have much more meaningful and practical expertise and experience to talk to you about. We have Sarah Jones, who's the chief civil engineer at Hinkley Point C for EDF. Ozma Taylor from our host, EGIS, who's the nuclear market director here in the UK. James Foreman there with his on-brand background, the head of civil program engineering at, you might have guessed it, Sizewell C. And then Paul Hankins, also admirably on-brand, who's the chief design engineer for Rolls-Royce SMR. I will start by asking, I guess you, Sarah, what does Hinkley Point C, one of the largest base construction projects in the UK and essentially in all of Europe. In your experience, what does effective collaboration look like on a project of that scale? And where can it break down, or where do you have to manage the risks to make sure that the teams are all working effectively together? Oh, you're on mute, Sarah. Pandemic throwback.
There we go. Apologies, folks. So good morning, everybody. As Lincoln says, I'm the Chief Civil Engineer for Hinkley Point C at the moment, but starting to work more and more on Sizewell C. And the two projects are a great example of replication and collaboration. So I guess with Hinkley being the first nuclear power plant to be built in the UK for many, many years, we sort of set it up as a client in a traditional way with quite strict barriers between client, between designer, between contractor. And I must admit, I'm old school and I'm also an ex-O&R inspector. I actually like those very clear boundaries. But the way the world's moving is more and more to collaboration so that we get the best from everybody, because obviously designers don't always appreciate how something's going to be built. Contractors don't always appreciate that a change from their point could have knock-on effects in the design. So collaboration is definitely the way forward. But when Lincoln asked me, where does it fall down? It's where the boundaries of responsibility are not clearly defined. You can work as collaboratively as you like with somebody, but ultimately it comes down to contracts and who's getting paid for what. So an appeal to everybody here is we might all think we know the landscape before we start a project or before we start a new task on a project, but it's always worth sitting down with all of your stakeholders in that and being very clear on who's doing what and what the boundaries are. And that way, in a way, conventional civil engineering projects, that's how they work. They're a lot more contractual. Maybe in nuclear, because ours are so bespoke designs each and every time, we tend to assume everybody knows, how they fit into the whole jigsaw of it all. But I think setting out clear lines of responsibility at the very start is a good thing. Having clear progress meetings with actions and, dare I say, minutes of meetings. We have a lot of meetings, we don't even minute them, we don't even have agendas, we just all rock up. So I think going back to a bit of old school discipline would really help.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up on that one before I'll go to you, Ozma, which is, I've heard the contract described as almost the project roadmap, basically past showing you how you succeed. Do you think that the nuclear sector should learn more from the, I guess, more standardized and less bespoke approaches of other civil construction? Or are there other, I guess, from your experience, so there are other things in contracting that the industry should focus on improving as we go forward and scale up our delivery?
I think, yeah, nuclear has always felt, we always say we're special, but are we in reality? There's a whole exercise going on at the moment that people are probably aware of called the Fingleton Report. And we're having many workshops. I was at one the other week with O&R and people from industry, and there we were talking about cranes. So, why not start with a good quality crane from conventional industry that might cost you 700,000, but by the time we nuclearize it, it becomes 6 or 7 million. So we've got to start learning from conventional industry what actually is the reliability of the stuff they produce. What exactly are we doing that's different to that? And make sure we're only bolting on the additional things that we absolutely need for the safety case. So again, collaboration with suppliers, with manufacturers. There's a lot of really good information out there that they can provide. And making sure we've got a sound basis for any of our decisions on supplier networks.
That's a big topic, Sarah. We'll come back to a little bit after the other speakers. And again, I encourage you, if you have in the Q&A, to please put in questions. It's a Fingleton review itself is a big subject on its own, as well as some of the other themes that Sarah's just raised. But if I might, I'll just turn to you, Ozma. Just a little more. Ozma's a business growth specialist, been working in developing high-value partnerships and leading commercial strategies in our sector for a couple of decades, and she's continuing her commitment to shaping the UK's nuclear culture with innovation, collaboration, smart commercial leadership, a very key point as well from what we've just been touching on. And so I guess, Ozma, I just ask you is, we hear, collaboration understandably critical to successful delivery. Heard from Sarah about the importance of clear lines of, or clear delineation of responsibility, who's doing what and who's not doing something. In that setup, what does genuine collaboration look like across organizations, and how do we make sure that actually gets embedded and put into practice?
Thanks for the intro, Lincoln, and I sound great, so I'd give me a job, so thanks for that, really appreciate it. Yes, I'll just talk about sort of my background and experience just for a couple of minutes. So nuclear market director, as you say, here at EGIS to grow the nuclear sector, to grow the business within our area. But I guess it's useful to bring in my background a little bit as well. So my background is obviously business development and strategy and growth, but also project delivery. So I've been on that side, I've worn the project manager hat and understand what it takes to deliver. As well as that, I've been a technical lead, so I understand technically what's going on. I'm a physicist by trade. So that kind of gives me a slightly different perspective. But I think above and beyond all of that, I think when we're talking about collaboration, replication, and how we make sure we deliver projects to schedule and budget, which is really what we all want to see now. I bring in my background before nuclear, where I was working in the manufacturing industry. So I spent a number of years as a lean manufacturing trainer in the food industry, for one, and a number of others. And I think that some of the conclusions I'm coming to, having had that kind of broad experience and what goes on outside of nuclear versus what goes on inside of nuclear, and the issues that we're facing, is that they're remarkably similar. So it usually comes down to a handful of issues, which is collaboration, people, when projects go wrong, are people gelling as a team? Are they working together? Are they collaborating? And before you can do any of that, replication comes secondary. The team's got to perform well. And that kind of all, what lives underneath all of that, ultimately it comes down to the team, the people. Do they gel? Do they get on? Not just within the company, but outside of the company as well, as you bring everybody in. And what does that look like? So having had some different experiences, both in the nuclear sector and in the food manufacturing sector, drawing together teams from across the executive and on the shop floor, that's really taught me quite a lot about how we can look at collaboration and try to do it such that it's real, not just a word, something we put in a nice bid document, but it's real and it actually works. So yes, I think that's something we need to have a look at. Is collaboration, in my view, is the output. That's what comes. It's what you put in. What are the ingredients that actually make collaboration? And I think what kind of sits underneath all of that and wraps around it completely is trust. If there is trust within your team, they trust each other, and they trust what they're doing. So they have a shared objective, a shared goal, and they share the successes and the failures. Then what you've got is a team that trusts each other and gets on. And out of that comes collaboration, which is what we want. So we want the end result, but how do you get there?
Can I ask you just, Ozma, on that? I've spoken to people who've led some of the UK's past nuclear projects, Sizewell B and Torness, and they always spoke about a sense of identity with the project rather than necessarily a primary identity with the different companies that were doing their part to build it. And there are lots of Hinkley Point C and other projects, lots of people working together to deliver, say, the MEH scope or whatever it may be. How, what is the best way, I guess, to build that culture of collaboration and delivery, where it's not, we're going to deliver our little bit, but we see ourselves as part of delivering along the critical path?
Yeah, so I think from what I've seen, so the projects that I've seen taking place at Hinkley and Sizewell, and the input that EGIS has, and the ICOSH consortium that's being run there, what that looks like, it's not just a project structure, it's not just a document. They're creating an environment where trust is the foundation, and there's a shared ownership of what we're trying to achieve. So what are we all trying to achieve, and make sure we're all working towards that same goal. So it's having that overarching view, as well as sharing the successes and failures. So is there an issue? Is there a risk that we need to highlight? And it's about allowing the team to be able to speak that and to actually clearly articulate the issues and know that they can speak their mind. It's not going to come back on them, which is sometimes a risk that people see. So it really is a fundamental thing to have that trust, such that people feel that they can speak up. They're completely comfortable doing that in that environment where they know that it will be a common issue. It's not their own issue, it's a common issue for the team to solve together. When you have that, that trust and therefore the collaboration that comes from it, it's not something that's easy to capture. You see it and you feel it. And that's when it does become a bit tricky. When you walk into a team that is collaborating, you just know it, you sense it and you feel it, which sometimes doesn't work so well when you're dealing with highly technical people, but that's you can sense it. And I think that comes from making sure that we are creating that environment. It's making sure that we allow people to speak up.
There's another good one to come back to in the Q&A. I have a follow up on that. But first, I want to come to James, who we said head of civil program engineering over at Sizewell C, and a fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineers, who have quite a nice building in central London. If you ever need a venue, and you have a bit of cash on the side, by the way, it doesn't come cheap. But he's been supporting the design of the major nuclear infrastructure across the UK for the better part of a decade, a better part of this Renaissance. He was head of the nuclear island buildings down at Hinkley Point C, and he's got extensive experience across both of the, I guess, the sister sites, the sister EPR sites. One of our industry's most distinguished professionals in the area. So, James, if I might start off asking you, Sarah mentioned replication, and it's rightly spoken about as a critical element of nuclear programs succeeding. What, in your experience, does it really mean in practice? And from where you are, Sizewell C, having done stuff at Hinkley Point C, where do you see those benefits most coming through at the moment?
Thanks, Lincoln. Yeah, good morning, everyone. James Foreman. I guess a bit of background of me, and I suppose I'm part of Replication in action. As Lincoln mentioned, I've spent many years, best part of a decade at Hinkley Point, and now moving over to Sizewell. And I guess that's part of making the point around the importance of people and the implicit knowledge that and experience that people carry, and that's a key part of making these things succeed. So yeah, replication is absolutely at the heart of Sizewell C. I'm going to explain a bit around what that looks like, particularly in sort of civils design world. So the first thing to say is that this is very obvious, but designing a nuclear power station is very hard. It's an enormous undertaking, and once the power station is up and operating, 3,000 megawatts, we're making huge amounts of revenue, nearly £7 million a day. So there's a huge schedule pressure to get us to that point, to get to the delivery completion of Sizewell C in operation, which means there's a lot of pressure in the design delivery to support that. So if you look back at Hinkley Point C and nuclear new build projects, that pressure means everything needs to happen at once. You're developing, if it's a new project, you're developing the safety case, you're developing the equipment design, you're developing the systems design, you're developing the building design, all in parallel, which is extremely hard. And to do that means that you have to take a lot of assumptions to enable work to progress. And when you're taking assumptions, that means you either need to take quite conservative assumptions, which can introduce its own kind of inefficiencies in design, or if your assumptions are not conservative enough, they get invalidated later, which creates kind of rework and change. So one of the biggest benefits of replicating a project like Hinkley to Sizewell means that we don't need to take those assumptions anymore. The safety case is there, the system design is there, the equipment design is there, the building layout is known, the equipment loads are known. We know virtually all of the inputs to our civils design from the very start. And at Sizewell, there's some things that are different. The ground is different, the seismic spectra is different, the soil properties are different. So there are some inputs that are new, and we have to kind of resubstantiate to that and push that through the civils design. But the maturity of most of our inputs is an order of magnitude greater than it would have been this stage point of Hinkley. So that brings us a huge amount of benefits. It means that our design delivery goes faster and cheaper, and we only have to do it once, hopefully. There's less design to do for some things. We're not even redesigning it. We're just proving that the inputs are bounded, and we can just pick up the sort of drawings and design from Hinkley and use them at Sizewell. So it minimizes the design effort. Also for the delivery partners, the people who are going to be building the civils or installing the equipment, they know at an early stage what it is they need to build, which allows them to plan for it in the most effective way, safest way, fastest way, which means that they've got better certainty, and therefore we expect the delivery phase to go better as well. And they're able to bring in their own lessons learned from having built the same stuff at Hinkley, and we're making small small modifications to support that faster delivery. So for example, our target of precast and prefabricated civil elements is going from 40% of the civils at Hinkley Point C to 60% at Sizewell C. So during our resubstantiation of the civils design, we can incorporate those new kind of precast elements and support our contractor to deliver the physical build faster. They're also able to buy the stuff they need to buy, the embeds, the you know, all the stuff that they have to purchase and procure. They can do that with much better, earlier procurement information as well. So there's huge benefits to all the parties in the project. And overall, you know, what we kind of forecast from Hinkley Point to Sizewell as a replication project is order of magnitude kind of 20% benefits to the project in terms of schedule and cost. So yeah, huge benefits.
Can I ask you, James, just one? You mentioned perhaps an underrated subject for people outside of it. What would you most like people who aren't involved in nuclear power plant design to know about how complicated designing a nuclear power plant is?
I mean, it's what always strikes me is just the sheer amount of, I'll use the word collaboration, but the sheer amount of number of people involved, the coordination required between parties. You've got so many organizations doing different bits who all rely on each other for interfaces and information. And essentially our job, my job and my team's job, is to coordinate that and make sure that people are doing what they need to do at the right time with the right information. And that's the majority of the battle as far as I'm concerned.
And just one quick one as a segue to Paul. Is there anything I could tempt you to advise him on about how to prepare for what they'll find in the ground when they start the early civil works at Wilva?
Oh God, yeah, not too familiar on the Wilva site, but I hope it's better than Sizewell because we've got plenty of problems there.
Well, I think I'll turn next to Paul, as Chief Design Engineer over at Rolls-Royce SMR, and with 20 years experience in civil and defence, joined Rolls as Chief Design Engineer just last year. Been a big time for Rolls-Royce with the contracts here in the UK, in Czechia, and also winning the selection over in Sweden. So what Paul's been doing himself is building multidisciplinary teams on these major infrastructure projects with some people in the supply chain, some of the big tier ones, as well as his experience just with Rolls-Royce. So Paul, as well as what you expect to find in the ground at Wilva, although not let me draw you on that just yet, but how are you approaching replication, standardization, and this fleet approach, considering that you have the UK project ambitions to do more in the UK, but also this I guess European fleet concept emerging?
Yeah, sure. Morning, everyone. I think I'd start by just agreeing with James that designing a nuclear power plant from scratch is very difficult, and I can assure everyone listening that that's the case. So I think for our approach, we have from the outset we've set out to design the plant for an envelope of conditions. So we haven't looked at any one site. We've taken a whole range of ground conditions and designed the plant for that full envelope. And that, in our view, the cost of the potentially over-design, the cost of the additional materials is insignificant compared to the saving and the speed that you get from replicating that design and not going around the buoy. And similar to what James was saying, the intent is that we have a generic design, we have a site, and we do a confirmatory check that the design is acceptable for that site. I think on top of that, we've also integrated like DFMA, or design for manufacturing assembly, right from the start. And we've had kind of specialist advice on that from some of our partners. And that's really helped us to enable a kind of replicated, standardized approach across everything we're doing. So all of the civils is heavily modularized, and that enveloped approach allows those modules to just be manufactured repeatedly for each site. On top of that, I think there's the sort of key about the factory-led approach, which is kind of design it once, manufacture it many times, and the significant benefit that you get from that. Can't really overstate how important that is. And then change is the real hard thing, and that's the real challenge for replication, right? And so working with clients to really kind of test and challenge them on, you've given us, first thing most clients do on day one is, here's 5,000 requirements, make sure you meet these requirements, please. So we're really working with them to try and test those and challenge them and say, do you really mean this requirement? Because this is what it's going to mean in terms of additional time, cost, and effort. And what is it that's driving you to want that particular change for you? And do you really believe that it's worth that time, cost, and effort? Or are you happy to have the standard off-the-shelf design? And so you mentioned the 3 countries. So GBN, Czech in the Czech Republic, and Vattenfall in Sweden. And there it's about, out of these changes, what's really, really necessary for either like a legal requirement, some statutory regulation that says you have to do this, and are any of these proposed changes, do they offer a significant benefit in terms of safety, or do they have a sufficient value case to really warrant driving in those changes, particularly seeing as we're all very closely aligned in our geography and so on. And so I think those are the kind of key things that we've adopted in our approach to support this.
One of the I guess the key factors in all this, nonetheless, is the role of people. And James was mentioning, I guess, a lot of the knowledge that people carry that's so valuable to these projects. What role do you see that as playing in replication? And I guess with the added challenge of managing this across, potentially 3 different countries, 3 different cultures, 3 different languages, how do you see that being able to support replication?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical in my mind, having worked in consultancy, in client side, and now in Rolls-Royce SMR. I've kind of sat in all sides of the fence, as it were. And I think quite regularly what you do when you're tendering work, you get organisations setting up saying, we designed Hinkley, we designed Sizewell, we designed ISA, we designed this project at Devonport or something. And you sort of say to them, well, we've just had X, Y, Z in the door, and they said exactly the same thing. So what is it about those projects that you actually delivered? When you dig into that, the next question that I then ask them is, okay, so who are the people that we're going to get on our project that were present on those projects? I don't think it's enough for organisations to say, we're going to give you the benefit of this learning, unless the actual people that land on the ground bring that knowledge and understanding with them. So I think it's absolutely critical. And I think James mentioned that it's, it is really about getting the same people that have actually lived through that experience, and then they come and deliver it for you in your particular project.
Can I ask you just one more, Paul, which is, you mentioned, 3 different clients. What would be your top 2 or 3 keys to pushing back on the creep of client requirements?
I guess they come, ultimately, what most people are interested in is time, cost, and effort, right? I think. And I think that's typically the case that we go with. But I think outside of that, as I mentioned before, safety is also critical, right? So as I said, designing a nuclear power plant and creating an integrated design and safety case for that power plant is very complicated. and it's quite surprising how much of an impact some changes can have, and the unintended consequences of changes can have. And so I think it's about really communicating with your client and getting them to understand the impacts of their decisions and helping them to weigh those up, and try and balance those.
Thanks, Paul. I'm just going to do a few questions. We've got a number of good questions that have come through from the chat, and I just want to ask a couple of follow-ups to what we've already discussed. Talked a lot about the importance of design. Sarah, I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned. But here's sometimes from the supply chain or people who are executing the builds, they'd like to have been brought into the design further. They thought they spotted a problem in the design. Same thing sometimes going the other way from the design teams to their constructors. What, in your view, is the key to effectively integrating, I guess, constructability into the design, or integrating the build and the design as effectively as you can, so you don't get surprises, mistakes, and rework down the track?
That's a really difficult one, because I guess from a HPC point of view, I sit on the client side, and the UK culture and the French culture.
I think we might have lost Sarah just there.
Do you
When
want
she unfreezes.
Do you want me to fill in while she's frozen?
Go on, Paul. You fill in with your view, and then when Sarah comes back, I'll push back to her.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned we've had constructability advice, design DFMA advice integrated from.
Can you?
You're back now, Sarah. Paul was just filling time like a good
I'm
MC.
Back. Right.
Yes, you're back now.
That was very strange, because you guys were completely clear to me, absolutely clear as a bell. So I don't quite know what happened there. But anyway, can you hear me okay now?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Go
on. So the thing I was talking about was the cultural differences. So because we're working in a multinational environment now, we really need to appreciate the cultural differences, because, as James and Paul have said, it's all about people at the end of the day. So understand the cultural differences. So from a pure design point of view, my experience is the UK design culture for civil engineering would be to detail things further into the construction stage. So things like waterproofing, things like even reinforcement, we detail it further. And then on Hinkley, what happened was the French design was not necessarily to detail it exactly, was to then hand it over to the contractor. And we had a bit of a gap, I think, early on in the project. We have, I've been working 40 years now, folks, so you'll have to bear with me. We've talked about early contractor engagement so many times, and yet it never really happens. Even now, it never really happens. The early contractor engagement we had on Hinkley when I joined the project in 2018, there is very few records of that. So if you are going to do early contractor or early designer or early supplier engagement, you can tell it's my main message is write it down, record it, have minutes of meetings, make sure you record, and it doesn't have to be long, just nice discrete bullets of what did we ask, what was the answer, because later on in the project you will come back to that decision and say, why did we do that decision? And if it's not recorded very well, it gets unpicked and unraveled. So on Hinkley, we call them zombie problems, because they just keep coming back and you keep killing them and they keep coming back. So make sure you don't have zombie problems, that you accurately record any decision that's been made and why. And I think the why part is, again, very peculiar to the UK. That's the way our regulator works, is that we like to know the exact reasons why we took a decision, because, picking up on Paul's point with his clients, if the client's insisting, or anybody is insisting on a very particular requirement, it's important to understand why they need that, because you might find we can solve it really, really easily just by doing something a bit different. So that would be my main message on that.
Couple points which come from there, which are questions we've had in the Q&A. Obi Habush has asked, do you think the contractual relationship has a major impact on how stakeholders collaborate within mega projects? And how can this be improved under the NEC framework? But I wanted to put a related question that Peter Sells put. Do the panel think that the culture or the contract should come first when defining collaboration approaches that stand the test of time and delivery, and why? Ozma, I might come to you first, but really I want to hear from everybody on this one, because I think it's quite an important subject.
So the question was, should the culture come first?
So yeah, so there's really two questions which are interrelated. So I thought Fisher's going to ask both. Does the contractual relationship have a major impact on how people collaborate within mega projects? And does the panel think that culture or the contract should come first when defining collaboration approaches?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's like which came first, chicken or the egg? So yes, I think the culture. So I think it's almost an iterative process. I think we need, if we're forming a truly collaborative team, then I would expect that any contract and any agreement or any alliancing takes place iteratively. So we come together with a first draft and we discuss that as a team, and that allows us then to bring in those cultural differences for discussion, to clearly articulate them, but then to discuss and find a way to produce something that we all agree with. So I think it's a case of we will need to lay out exactly what the contract to be at a high level, but then pull in people from those different cultures and different backgrounds as well, so that they can have a view on that, and it becomes an iterative process that then begins from the very early stages, from the point where it's still a seed of an idea, to create that collaboration all the way through, because everyone's had their chance to actually say what they think needs to be said in terms of bringing everyone together. So I think it's probably a little bit collaborative. I think we need to start with something definitely that we all think needs to be in the contracts. That's got to be the starting point, but then it should be iterative.
Paul, I know you were doing a little filling while Sarah had frozen for a second. I want to bring you in on that if you have a view.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think contracts are absolutely fundamental to successful collaboration, right? I think that covers the first part of the question. And culture is really important, right? Like, one of the main priorities in my team is everyone's physical, mental well-being. We have a really good, safe working environment, very respectful. It's all about getting people the best possible experience they can have on our project. But I think actually most organizations and all people come to a project wanting to do the right thing, right? Very few people turn up deliberately not to do the right thing. So I think actually incentives is actually what I would say. And, you know, if a contract rewards every company for optimizing its own little piece of the pie, then in my experience, that never really works in actually optimizing the whole project and getting everyone to deliver the ultimately what is the objective that everyone's pointing at. So I think for me, like, really critical in this is having shared objectives in the contract. We mentioned early contractor involvement already. I think the key point there is it's the contractors who are actually going to build it. And when you're looking at a design that's intended to be replicated in 3 different countries, for the moment, there are more on the way. How do you get that buy-in to the constructability approach, which is inherently included in our design? That's one of the things we're going around at the moment. Transparency of information, transparency of behaviors, transparency of scope, transparency of costs, etc., is really important. And yeah, I really think that incentivizing everyone to go after a, you know, let's say a shared pot of money, call it a risk pot if you like, whatever you want to call it, based on program-wide objectives is a much better way than saying, okay, you're designing that building over there. If you do it, you know, 10 weeks early, I'll give you a bit of extra cash or something. I think it's really got to be, as a team, we're all on this project to deliver this objective.
Can I ask just on that point, actually over to you, James, which is, I think you mentioned, each day is £7 million of revenue once the thing starts generating, and that's a big macro incentive to get things done faster. And you can see a lot of what Paul's talking about is, a big pot to incentivize everyone to deliver on that critical path. How do you, in design, resist the temptation though to go too quickly before things might be ready?
Okay.
Or resist the pressure to go too quickly?
Yeah, I think it's something personally I learned from Hinkley, which kind of wasn't obvious to me at the start. But yeah, sometimes it's you don't want to design too early. You need to understand the maturity of the information you're using and the need dates. And going too early is, well, I was going to say as bad as too late, but maybe not. But it's not ideal. Yeah, I've got a few thoughts on how we collaborate both through the contracts and through the culture.
Please do.
First, yeah, we need to make sure the contracts don't sort of block collaboration, but I think there's only so far they can go. But echoing a lot of what people have said, we do the same thing. The fee on most of our contracts is set up so that the fee is incentivized to project milestones, not necessarily milestones of that contractor, but are we as a project hitting the things we need to do to make the whole thing work. Also, as Sarah was saying before, the importance of structuring the design sequence very clearly. In our design sequence, we've got, which we then kind of mandate everyone to work to, we've got blocks of time called the collaborative phase, where the contractor comes in, produces a document that's, the method statement documents which feed into the design, and it's all very well structured so we know exactly what needs to be defined by who, when. It's not flawless, but defining that as clearly as you can, and structuring that in as a process is an enabler to collaboration and getting the construction inputs we need. But then there's kind of the culture part, which I think you can't, is harder to write into a contract. And I think there one of my bits of advice would be building that culture together. So one thing we've done at Sizewell, which again we sort of borrowed from Hinkley Point C, is we've got this initiative called United Civil Works, which essentially is pulling together everyone involved in delivering the civils design. So the client, the designer, the detailer, well, that's a different person, the contractor, our design assurance, intelligent customer functions, and together, kind of through last year, we came together over several months to define how did we want to work together. We've built this kind of governance framework that pulls us together, the organisations together at various levels, called United Civil Works. And I think the fact that we came up with that together, it means that everyone's kind of brought in, and yeah, we're not mandating what collaboration looks like as a client. We're defining what good looks like together.
Can I ask, it's related to something actually that Paul's mentioned, James has touched on about transparency. As Paul said, transparency about behaviors, about information. Paul was saying people show up in the project wanting to do the right thing. And I think actually Ozma, you touched on it. How do we instill a culture of honest reporting into a project? And I guess the flip side of that coin, the culture of honest reporting, and also a sense of what people call psychological safety, that if people see a problem, they feel that they can and should bring it up and report it, rather than feeling whether for the good of their team or that they shouldn't mention it. I don't know, Ozma, if you want to start with that one, or maybe Sarah, if you want to come in.
Do you want to go for it, Ozma?
Yeah, go Sarah, yeah.
Sarah, over to you.
Okay. I think an example I'd give is on Hinkley. We early on used our defect notifications, we call them non-conformance reports on Hinkley NCRs, as a way of measuring the quality of what the contractor did. And that was completely wrong because it drove the wrong behaviours. So the contractors would say, we don't want to raise an NCR because we don't think it was an issue. It was either a design issue that's forced us into this. So that process drove the wrong behaviours. Ideally, we wanted the non-conformance report to be raised very quickly, so we could deal with it quickly and get it fixed, regardless of who had caused it in the first place. So I think your processes of how you're going to manage the construction, you need to seriously look at those. And again, as all the other panel members have said, you know, it's not about a blame culture, it's about a solution culture. We see a lot on our TV sets, on the news. It's all about, if somebody's to blame for something, right, they've got to resign and out, you know, get rid of them and bring the next person in. And I think that's unfortunately a UK cultural thing as well. If we are truly engaged in lessons learned and improving going forward, we've got to get rid of that mentality. And yes, have measurements to highlight to people where they can improve, but don't use it as a big stick to beat somebody with. So definitely look at your processes. At the end of the day, it's not rocket science, you know. We can build some really, really good processes. That means things are efficient. We do learn, we do truly learn, and we then move on to the next task.
Sure. Ozma, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, just wanted to, yeah, so I think the LFE, the learning from experience that you spoke of, Sarah, so that's kind of a bit of a bugbear for me. So I think we all talk about LFE in the industry, and I've seen it a lot where we fill in the post-project LFE, we do the sessions, we fill in the documentation, and then so often it ends up going on the shelf. And I think that's one of the techniques I've used in previous years, which is actually driving the culture and the change that we want through LFE. So actually using the LFE in a way to allow people to talk about what didn't work so well, but then move forwards and talk about what we can do differently next time round, and then actually implementing that. It's a long process and there's no kind of magic solution to it, but what it does do is let people see. I think that psychological safety unfortunately comes really from people seeing that it's okay. It's no good writing it down in a document or a collaboration agreement. You have to actually see it to believe it. And I think that was a kind of a low-key, simple way to actually see that change. So suggest some LFE, actually goes up, it's received positively throughout the organisation, and then we come back and actually implement, however small, some of the suggestions from that LFE to drive that feeling of psychological safety that's really critical. It's kind of the backbone to all of this. People need to feel that they can speak up.
Can I ask Paul, and first if you have any to add on that, but also the question, which goes to the theme of how this industry learns from the successes of other industries. A question from Dan Benson on how the industry is engaged with oil and gas about how they have undertaken standardization and replication and collaboration through alliancing. But I particularly wanted to ask you maybe any learnings from oil and gas and what they do on standardization and replication, which I think is probably fair to say they've done to a significantly greater degree than we've done in the nuclear industry.
Yeah, I guess one of our key partners is now ACCA. They're our modules partner. They are a company with a really long and very strong history in oil and gas, and we have quite a few of their people now in the project, as you'd expect, and they really bring a lot of really good experience, and they approach things slightly differently, but they're still a high hazard industry, right? So they have all that sort of base understanding. I think our approach of using what we call steel frame process clusters, so I'm sure everyone will have seen the kind of blue steel frame modules that fit on the back of a lorry. We assemble those into what we call a process cluster, and that in its finished form, is fairly comparable to something like an oil and gas topside, right? So yeah, we've taken a lot of learning from that. We're using a lot of those approaches. We've got partners on board who come from an oil and gas background. I think for me, if I may just quickly, I think one of the key things is that nuclear projects take a long time, and the the learning from Hinkley will have gone on for, Sarah, what is it, 20 years, 25 years it will have gone on for. You know, a lot of people have come and gone, and people will have made an entire career out of one project. And the learning from that won't really be fully adopted until afterwards, right? Whereas in oil and gas, the projects are much quicker. So that cycling of LFE comes a lot more readily. And so you get people who have multiple projects very quickly and can carry that learning through more quickly.
Can I just on that one, Paul? How do we? One of the things the Fingleton review, and I don't mean to pick on, she said that there's an attitude in the industry that because nuclear projects take a long time, which they have done, but then of course they're going to take a long time, and it becomes a bit self-reinforcing. How are you guys kind of approaching trying to break people out of the assumption that kind of first of a kind is as good as we're going to be, or that, you know, it has to take a long time? How do you kind of move people to take it seriously, that there are lots of complex things, it is going to be a serious long-term project, but spur people to think about how they can accelerate the program?
It's quite a broad question. I think our entire approach, right, is to try and solve this problem of nuclear projects taking a long time, and not only taking a long time, but taking the time that you say it will take, right? Which I think is, for operators and investors, one of the key things, right? They want to know with certainty, as much as that is possible, you know, I'm investing this money and I'm going to have my asset in, you know, this amount of time. And so the whole factory-led approach to that, taking as much of the work away from site as possible, which, you know, James and Sarah have talked about, modularizing as much of it as possible, including all the, you know, heavily reinforced large seismic qualified concrete structures, and then having that generic design approach, using consistent partners, using consistent people. I think all of these things will help to try and deliver nuclear deliver what we say we're going to deliver when we said we're going to deliver it.
Thanks, Paul. There's one question before I ask 30-second final thoughts from each of you. One for you, James. With the gap between the final investment decisions at Hinkley and Sizewell, although they are replica projects, what are your thoughts? Arthur Lefebvre had this question. Thoughts on code and standard evolution between projects that means certain elements might no longer be replicable, or how do you make the case, even if they are been updated, that you can still replicate what the old standard was?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's definitely something we've had to grapple with. I think it's impacted kind of the manufacturing and the equipment scope more than it's impacted civils. But yeah, we've developed a codes and standards strategy. We do have engaged with the ONR on that, and essentially it enables us to, Sarah might know more than me to be honest, but use the standards from Hinkley Point where that doesn't lead to, where we can demonstrate that doesn't sort of create any risks, and that's what our suppliers are ready to deliver to, or that our suppliers are able to use more recent standards where that's what's going to be best for them, and then we'll assess that on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks. Well, we have 2 and a bit minutes left, so I just want to ask from each of you 30 seconds on if there was one thing that you think that should change in the industry, that you could change to make delivery more effective, to make collaboration more efficient. What would it be? I'll start with you, Sarah.
I think, again, going back to the culture, I've found since lockdown our office culture's changed massively, and nobody's happy really, because we don't have, particularly when we're bringing in young people, we don't have an office culture where we have teams in the offices all at the same time. Everybody's hot desking. In the old days when I was, starting out, I'd have my family photo on my desk and my calendar, and it was my desk, and there was a sense of belonging. And I think we're losing that in the office space. So I think that would be my main appeal to everybody here, is make sure you do engage everybody on your team. You make them all feel part of that team. You do say good morning to them in the morning. You do say good night when you leave the office. You know, just the general things, that human interaction. It's decreased over the last 5-6 years, and I think we need to get it back.
Sure. That's an important one. Ozma.
Yes, I think for me it's about that psychological safety. So making sure that people are comfortable and happy to speak up throughout the business, and that comes really, I think, from example setting. And we need people who are senior in the business to act that way, to behave that way, and that culture gradually trickles through the organisation. So let's be the change that we want to see, and make sure that everyone feels safe to speak up. So collaboration is really tested when things are not going well. When everything's going to plan, it's great.
Sure. Paul, one change?
I think there's a real opportunity here for perhaps it requires a bigger role for government. Perhaps it just requires a better, here we are talking about collaboration between key developers. So, I mean, you've got EDF and Rolls-Royce SMR here. There are other companies trying to develop in the UK. I think there's a real opportunity to go after some of the opportunities together as a UK nuclear industry, rather than each of us going after these things in isolation. If I picked one off the top of my head, steel plate composite is a good example, right? Even in the defense sector, people are doing their own research programs, they're doing their own projects to try and design and underpin and justify to the regulator exactly the same thing as the other people are, right? So that would be a good example of somewhere where, whether it requires government intervention or whether it's just collaboration between us developers, let's actually go and develop a UK code for it. Let's co-fund the development of it so that we can all get the potential benefits that it offers. That's one example. I'm sure there are many others where there could be real benefits to going after things together rather than trying to do our own thing.
Sure. Thanks very much, Paul. Last word, James.
Yes, thanks. I'll be quick. Just something that we've talked about multiple times, but I'm going to say sort of being ready to learn from other industries, and I'll talk about doing that through people. So again, I've said we're trying to replicate people and bring people from Hinkley to Sizewell, but obviously we don't want everyone to come from Hinkley to Sizewell, because we also need to learn how to do things better, and we've got people coming from oil, gas and other industries. So being very ready to embrace new ideas from other areas, and being humble about, do we know the best way of doing things or not?
Thank you all very much, Sarah, James, Ozma and Paul, for your time. Thank all of you for sticking with us in this webinar. This is the key subject. We'll hopefully come back to this one, because how we deliver better, how we collaborate, get this program moving, getting projects done faster is the central challenge facing all of us in the industry. So thank you to all of the panelists here. Thank you to all of you who have been listening. Thank you to EGIS for hosting, and hope to see all of you again soon. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lincoln. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.